Welcome to Stories Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Weldin. Today's story is called Tailor Tales, a story inspired by Beatrix Potter's The Tailor of Gloucester, written for you by Daniel Hinds. Thanks! Enjoy the episode! Tailor Tales. Once upon a time, not too long ago, there lived a tailor named Tailor. A tailor is someone who makes and fixes clothes, and Tailor was an excellent one. He owned a little shop called the Hem and Haw in a little town called Gloucester. It was a poorish town, and Tailor was a poorish man with holes in his pants and, he suspected, holes in his pockets. At least, that would explain why he never seemed to have any money, no matter how hard he worked. In truth, there just wasn't much money to be had. Gloucester was mostly fishermen, and they could sew up their own nets just fine. There were coats to make, pants to patch, and suits to alter, but not enough to keep Tailor busy. To save money, he used every last scrap of fabric. If he made a coat, he kept the cut-offs. If he needed a patch, he would use those cuts and keep the little tiny scraps left over. Those little scraps were too small for anything practical, but Tailor had noticed a family of shivering little mice. They lived in the wall between his shop and the one next door. Wanting them to be warm, he sewed his scraps into cozy little coats for all the mice. It drove his cat Simpkin crazy, but it was worth it. The mice seemed to love the coats, but that didn't help much with money. Tailor the tailor was still barely getting by week to week. What he needed was to get in with the fancy crowds who had fancy and expensive clothes. If given the chance, Tailor knew he wasn't just a tailor. He was an artist, and his work would be recognized if only it was being worn by the right person. Unfortunately, they had their own fancy people tailors in their fancy people cities and never seemed to visit his quaint little shop with its well-dressed mice. Until one day, they did. It was early morning, and Tailor was feeding Simpkin the cat when a roundish man with a great waxed-up mustache pushed into the shop. A smaller man, also roundish, followed behind like a moon in his orbit. "Haw, rumph, 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 rumph," said the bigger man in a very fancy way. He was fancy all over, really, with his fine slacks and gold rings, and Tailor blinked in sudden realization. This was the mayor of Gloucester, here in his shop. "Humph, rumph, rumph, rumph. The mayor is looking for a tailor," the smaller man added helpfully. "I'm the tailor," Tailor said. "Humph, rumph, rumph, rumph. The mayor would like to know your name." "But it's Tailor." "Humph, rumph, rumph. Tailor the tailor?" "That's right," said Tailor, who'd had this conversation about 1,000,000 times in his life, though never quite like this. Rumph, 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 rumph. Tailor looked at the mayor's assistant. "The mayor says that he needs a new coat, and he wants you to make it." "Me?" asked Tailor before he could stop himself. "Meow," Simpkin added. Rumph, 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 rumph. "He said that everyone is wearing the same big names these days. He wants something local, something different, something that no one else has." Rumph, 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 added the mayor. "And we needed Christmas Eve Day." At first, Tailor wanted to say no. Christmas Eve was only a few days away, and it would have to be the finest coat he'd made in, well, ever. The pressure was too much. The time was too little, but then, "Of course, we'll compensate you for the rush job." The assistant took out a wad of cash and counted out a stack of bills onto the counter. It was more than Tailor would make in a month. "This is the advance," the assistant continued. "We'll pay the other half when we pick up the jacket. Do we have a deal?" Tailor could only nod. No matter how hard the job or how big the rush, he couldn't turn down the money. The mayor and his assistant bustled out of the shop and left the money on the counter. Simpkin came over and sniffed it, and then sat down on the pile with a happy purr. "Well, we've got 3 days," Tailor said, petting his cat. "Let's get to work." He turned the sign on the door to closed. Little repairs, if they even existed, would have to wait. It was time for serious business. It was time for serious art. He got out his chalk and finest fabrics and tape and thread and a bunch of other tools of the trade and got to work. Tailor the tailor was like a tornado. Simpkin the cat and the cozy-coated mice watched in wonder as he was all over the room, measuring this and drawing on that, unrolling one thing and cutting another. Finally, he had laid out all the pieces of the coat. It was to be a rich, deep red with accents of golden thread. It would be the hit of the Christmas party, and come New Year's, Tailor would have a line of customers stretching out the door. In the early hours of the morning, as the sun was beginning to creep up the horizon, Tailor finally let himself go to bed. He lived in a small apartment above his shop, so he trudged up and was asleep as soon as he hit the mattress. In the shop below, the mice were discussing all the activity. "That'll be one fine jacket," said Mamma Mouse. She was wearing a puffy pink coat that the tailor had made her last fall. "'Bout time our man got some good luck," agreed Papa Mouse. He wore a navy jacket. It was made of heavy canvas that had been left over from when the tailor had patched up some old military uniforms. "When he finishes this coat for the mayor, the shop is sure to succeed." "And then we'll have more cheese?" asked Sister Mouse, wearing a rainbow shawl. "I want stinky cheese! Stinky, stinky!" said Brother Mouse in his bright green hoodie. "If it all goes to plan," said Mamma Mouse, and then they heard Simpkin the cat coming and went back to their little home in the wall to sleep. They wanted to be up early the next morning to watch Tailor the tailor do his tailoring. Except the next morning, Tailor never came down to the shop. The sun came up and shone down clear and bright, and still he didn't come. Simpkin strolled down and meowed by her food bowl for a while, but even that didn't get Tailor out of bed. The mice, fearing something was wrong, climbed up through the floor and into Tailor's bedroom. There, peering through some cracks in the wall, they saw the tailor. He was pale and sweating and sleeping hard in his bed, clearly sick with the flu. Simpkin came in and meowed again. Then, when she got no answer, she climbed up and stood on her owner's chest. "Meow," she demanded. Tailor groaned and rolled over. "Oh, breakfast. Soon," he slurred. "I've gotta make the coat." And then he fell back to sleep. "What do we do?" asked Sister Mouse. "We wait," said Papa Mouse. "He's 2 more days. It's probably just something he ate. He'll be better tomorrow." But tomorrow came and went, and still nothing. Simpkin was forced to claw open her bag of food and feed herself. The materials for the coat, all the rich red fabric and gold trim with the patterns drawn, sat untouched on Tailor's workbench. "Oh, Papa," said Mamma Mouse sadly, "the coat." "He has another day," Papa said, but he was sounding sadder himself. The next day, Tailor was a little better. He stayed awake long enough to drink about a gallon of water, and then he fell back to sleep again. But his color was better. Unfortunately, tomorrow was Christmas Eve, and he'd never finish the coat in time. "Oh, well," he thought to himself, head swimming with fever. "Maybe the mayor will understand." But deep down, he knew that he would never understand. Not enough to make it matter. Downstairs, the mice had come to the same conclusion. "The mayor will be here for his coat tomorrow," Mamma said. "Poor Tailor is still sick. He's made us all such lovely coats. I wish we could help him." "When you're right, said Papa. "Get the other families he's made coats for. That tailor has always been good to us. Now it's our turn to work a little Christmas magic." Mamma smiled and scurried off. Papa brought down brother and sister to the table and started looking over the designs. Soon, Mama came back with a whole crowd of mice. They were small and fuzzy, and they were wearing parkas and peacoats, duffels and dusters, blazers and bombers and more. "We've all watched the tailor work over the years," Papa called to the cozy crew. "Now it's time to put all that watching to use. We've got a coat to make. All paws on deck. Let's get to it." The mice let out a mighty cheer and got to work. They strung up a needle and thread. Others fetched fabric and tugged tassels. A big group went to scoop the shears, but found them too heavy to lift. "Come on now," said Mamma Mouse. "We've got to get this cut." The mice struggled, but still couldn't lift the shears. They made a terrible clanging racket, and while it wasn't enough to wake up Tailor, it was more than enough to draw the curiosity of Simpkin the cat. She crept up close, quiet and careful, until she was right next to the coat. "And what's going on down here?" she asked. The mice screamed in terror. Some ran in terror. Others froze in terror. Others did other things, but all of them did it with terror, that was for sure. "I see you're helping Tailor with the coat." Simpkin held up a paw and extended a razor-sharp nail. "Maybe I can be of assistance." She reached past the trembling Papa Mouse and cut out the rich red fabric, following the pattern perfectly. "What are you waiting for?" she asked. "Let's get to work." The mice cheered again, and cautiously at first, got back to work alongside the old cat. And together they labored long into the night. The next morning, Tailor woke up in a puddle of his own cold sweat, with a half-remembered thought bugging at his brain. His fever had finally broken in the night, and things seemed much better. He rinsed himself off and got dressed, and was halfway through his toast before he finally remembered what was nagging at him. "The coat!" he yelped. The mayor would be coming for the coat any minute now. There was no chance he'd be able to make something in such a short time, but he could at least try. Maybe the mayor would be late. It wouldn't be art, but Tailor thought he could make something if he just had a few hours. He headed down the stairs, hoping the mayor would be late, and then he froze when he heard a knock at the door. The mayor would like to come in and pick up his coat. Of course, the mayor and his assistant arrived the minute the shop was due to open. Oh well, thought Tailor. There was nothing for it. He'd have to admit he got sick and give back the money. His chance was blown. With a sigh, he crossed the shop and opened the door. The mayor and his assistant bustled in and sat themselves at the workbench. "I'm sorry to say, but I have bad news," Tailor said. "Bad news?" asked the assistant. "This coat is amazing." "It's what?" Tailor spun around and marched to his bench. There, perfectly laid out and folded, was the finest coat that any of them had ever seen. It was all rich red with gold trim, carefully cut and supremely stitched. said the mayor. "He loves it," said the assistant. "But what's the bad news?" Tailor's mind was whirling. Had he come down and worked while he was sick? He must have. His fever must have just been so bad that he forgot. But the work was done. He had done it. "Oh, I just haven't finished polishing the buttons," he said quickly. He took up his varnish rag and touched up the buttons briefly so they shone in the light. "There, now it's perfect." The mayor agreed, and the assistant was soon peeling off another stack of bills and carefully picking up the coat. As they headed out the door, the mayor turned back. "Great work, young man," said the assistant. "You're going to go far." They left, and Tailor slumped against the door. His head was spinning, and he started to laugh and laugh. What in the world had happened? Had he really made a perfect coat? He must have. "Unless it was you," he said, scratching his cat Simpkin's back. "Can you imagine?" Simpkin meowed, and Tailor smiled wide. Nearby, hidden in their homes by the floorboard, the mice were smiling back. The coat was a big hit at the Christmas party, and come New Year's, there was a line out the door for Tailor the Tailor's tailoring. His work was just so amazing, everyone agreed. The designs were impeccable, and the stitching was so tiny and fine, it could have been done by a mouse. The end. Thanks for listening.